what you're going to want to do with your preloads, make sure that's turned all the way flat. Even with no preload on it, it's still going to have a little bit of tension on there. So you got to use a spring compressor to get this thing off. As you can tell, I had my preload basically maxed out on this thing just because I'm a big guy. This is what I'm using today. Torque wrench for torquing the bolts back up when I put it back in. 3/8 inch drive ratchet extension, because you got to get way back in there for the upper bolt on the shock. A 17, a 15 socket, a 15 box wrench, open wrench, so you can hold the bolts on the other side. These are the spring compressors. And then I printed out I have a PDF file of the whole shop manual, so I just printed out the one page. For doing the shock, it's in section 18. Today we're working specifically off of 18-8. If you're doing this on your center stand, chock the front wheel so it can't roll forward and backward, particularly forward, and come off of your center stand. Alright, here's that one. So that first step was taking that bolt that I just took out is for the cushion arm, and that's this. There's your linkage. There's your lower bolt for the shock, so I'm going to do that one next. To get this, you undo the nut, you just lift up the rear swing arm a little bit, pops right out. And these are the 17s. And this is where the 15mm open end wrench comes in handy. Okay, bottom of the shock is free. It's got the rectifier plugs off. Gray goes on left side, black goes on right side. And that is giving me another inch of clearance in here. We're taking this nut off. Be real careful. I mean, it's going to drop, and it's going to drop into an area that you can probably get it, but why hunt for it if you don't have to? And of course, instead of dropping the bolt down in there somewhere, or the nut, I just dropped the bolt. So yay, go me. You don't get looks like this and have brains too. So now the shock is loose. It's not attached at all. So now I'll need to wiggle the swing arm up and down to get the shock out. So you're going to follow me on that frustrating journey. No wheel removal. Didn't take out the ECU, didn't take off the swing arm. One thing I did do, however, to help myself out lifting up the extra weight because the wheel's on the swing arm, is this. Put a ratchet strap. I have pannier racks on, so I hooked it to that side, down underneath the rim, back up to this side. So I just pull on it. I can lift. And if I need to get it to a certain height, I just do a trucker's hitch and tie it off. There we go. And there we go. There we go. Now the spring can come off, so you just reverse the process. Compressing the new spring evenly. So you put those collar clips back on. Double checking. You're doing it evenly. Double checking every time. Make sure your compressor teeth aren't going to slip off. Stuff's going to go flying. Periodically check. And see if you have enough room to get your clips in. Not yet. You want to periodically check to see if you can get the clips in, so you don't want to over tighten if you don't have to. Why make something even more dangerous when it doesn't have to be? There we go. Okay, they're both going to fit. Just got to get them to seat down inside of that collar. Like that. And now you very slowly loosen them. And that one is not in. Now I just got to put it back in the bike. And there it is. I didn't film putting it back on. I was filming taking it off. It's literally just the reverse process, but it's in there. Put that spring on so that color could match the undercarriage. No, I'm kidding. It's a heavier spring rate because I am a heavier spring rate. Now it's time to set the sag. So that's what I'm doing. Oh, one thing that I did do when I was putting the shock back on the bike is this right there, that thin thing right up in there. That's the rectifier. I did end up taking that out, not just unplugging it like I did when I took the shock out, but I did end up taking it off the bike, and it did give me quite a bit more room to finagle the shock back in there. The thing that takes up the most room when you're putting the shock back on is the preload adjuster, because it sticks way off. So I did take the knob off. That gave me a little bit of room, and I also took out the rectifier, and that gave me enough wiggle room to actually, it was much easier to put it straight in. So if I ever did this again, or if I help somebody else do it on their bike, that rectifier is coming out. But the wheel never came off the bike, the swing arm never came off the bike. It is possible. Everything else was easy. The whole job is easy. It's just have patience when you're taking the shock off. Take your time and look at how you're going to have to do it and move stuff around to make it happen. And maybe a little bit of whiskey too. Just be very, very sure that the bike's not going to roll forward off of your center stand. Make double sure. I loosened the top clamp bolts on each side before I started loosening the fork caps on each side. Before I did any of that, I wound the preload on both sides all the way out. I had 14 turns, 14 full turns of preload on each side. That's pretty well maxed out on the forks on these things, so we're going to see what this thing ends up as, or with, when I'm done. I'm trying to do this with the fork legs in the bike to prove it can be done. I know it can be. I've talked to a couple of suspension people who say it can be done if you're just doing springs. Very, very important. If you're only doing springs, then that's fine. But if you need to do oil and the slider seal and O-rings or rebuild your cartridge or whatever, you got to take the fork legs off the bike. Don't try and do all that with it on the bike. That would be a night. I don't even think you could do it. So, well, what's going to happen is I'm going to undo those fork caps, and then I'm going to use a jack. I already have the front that's on the center stand, and the front is already blocked. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a jack and just move the front wheel up until the seal here bottoms out there. And that will allow me to get to all the internals. Supposedly. We're about to find out. There's the spring collar and the fork caps that are extended because I have four jack fully bottomed out the suspension to expose all that stuff. Now I'm going to use my special tool to move the spring collar down so I can access the lock nut at the bottom of this to fully remove this. Spring collar comes off, spring comes out, new spring goes in, it all goes back together. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. that allows me to be able to hold the lock nut on the bottom to be able to turn this to get it off. Just need to figure out what size that is. That's what it is a 17. There, oh. There we go. Just like that. Now if you're doing this while these are all on the bike and kind of angled back like they do, have a rag handy, do all your movements really slowly. You make sure you retain as much oil in there as possible. Don't forget to take off the top bushing from the spring collar. Now that that's done, press your spring collar back down with your tool, take your tool out, and very carefully let the spring collar up. I'm going to use my spring collar tool as a handle. The bottom of this spring collar has a plastic spacer on it. And it's going to want to bring oil with it. See, right there. So just be careful when you're taking it out, otherwise you're going to bring out a bunch of oil. I am going to have these forks serviced in about another year. Yeah, the oil's a little dark. I could probably replace the oil now, but one spring out. Yes, I need to clean my garage. Yes, I need more lights. But this is as real as it gets, right, for a garage mechanic. This is linear, not progressive. A little bit thicker wire and a tighter wind on this. So, and that's it. And I just reverse the process and then do the same thing for that side. I lost very little oil, just a negligible amount, not even measurable. So I am okay. I mean, seeing the oil, it is pretty brown, so it is time for a fork service, probably in the next 1,000 miles or so, which I figured it was coming anyway. I will have that done. I'm not going to do that a full service myself. That's more than I have tools or proper workspace for. Wipe up any excess oil that may have dripped because you got in a hurry, like I did. Can also be done without a damper rod extension tool. You got to be quick though. the extension tool screws onto the end of the damper rod and then it sticks out about this far. That way you can get a hold of it once you get the spring collar on, but you don't need it, and I just did it. I'll actually film it on this side. What you do is you pull the damper rod out until, you know, about here. It won't come all the way out, and then it will gradually, slowly move back into the fork leg. However, that gives you time to get the spring collar on and get it down fast enough to be able to grab the damper rod and slow its descent. And then what you need to do is you need to quickly, and since I'm putting on heavier rate springs, it was a little bit more difficult to do, harder to press down. However, I was able to press the spring down and get my stopping fork here in there before the damper rod went all the way back in the leg. So damper rod extension tool would come in handy, but not necessarily needed. So I got the fork cap back on. It's tight. Double check it before I button everything else back up. When you're putting it back on, don't forget to put your top, I forget what it's called, just a little plastic collar thing that goes up underneath there. Don't forget to put that back in. Okay, that is tight. Now, just go press that down enough to take the fork out. Make sure that plastic thing seats on the spring collar correctly. Like that. One side complete. See, and I don't think I filmed this yet, but you just get that. There's two holes on either side of the spring collar, and you just put this tool down on there, and then it has these two things screw in, and they screw into those holes. This gives you handles, so you just push that spring collar down and get your little fork up underneath there. I'm doing this with the forks on the bike just to prove that it can be done, but if you're doing a full service, and this is just for springs only, and even the manual still says the fork legs need to come off the bike. I can do it, it's just lots of extra work, and I don't really have the right bench vise to be able to clamp these things down without damaging them once they are off the bike. So since I'm just doing springs, I leave them in the bike. Fork bolt, call it the cap. I think the manual actually calls it the fork bolt. Slowly pull it out from the damper rod. This big old long rod is attached to it. That's your rebound or your damper adjustment. Oh, and what I did to get the spring out, because you can't reach it, I just took a clean wire. It's like baling wire, and I cleaned it off. And I bent a little hook at the end of it so I can fish it down in there and just pull the spring out. The most amount of oil is going to come out when you take the spring out. Just have a rag ready, within reach, so you're not having to do what I'm doing right now. Right, same deal. New coil just drops right in. I'm going to show you the fun part, where it's a race against time to get the spring collar on before the damper rod falls all the way back down in there. Okay, here's the fun part. Slowly pull your damper rod up. Until it stops. Don't force it out. And hold it. Now see what I mean? Now watch. I'm gonna let go of the damper rod. Watch. It moves very slowly, so you do have some time. If you don't get it the first time, do it again. You're also doing everything slowly because you don't want to create air bubbles in that oil. You want to keep it air bubbleless. You know, press that. Yeah, see, I didn't do it fast enough, so we got to go again. Again, didn't do it fast enough. Oil all over my bike. Awesome. There we go. Got it. Bugger. Boom. Got it. Gotta tighten it down. Put it all back together. 14 on the bottom. 17 on the top. Most important part of anything you can do in the garage. Mucho importante. Clean up your workspace when you're done, or else you're going to pull wife aggro every time. That's on. Now we can very slowly lower the wheel down and lower those back into the legs. Nope. There we go. This is when you're putting the when you're tightening the fork caps back up, start them by hand. That way you can feel and make sure that the threads seat correctly and don't cross thread. You don't want to cross thread that. That's an expensive mistake. $26 foot-pounds for the fork bolt. There we are. The pinch bolts on the sides that hold the fork tubes in, they are 18 foot-pounds per shop manual. I did the springs because the front and rear springs, you do springs for weight and ride height. You do compression and rebound for your comfort and control. So this thing needed more ride height when I was sitting on it, because I was probably only using half of its travel just because the springs were so soft, and that's with preload. I mean, with my luggage and everything on it, was using all that. So this is going to vastly improve that issue. Click. 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 Now we got to put the bars back on. Before I took the bars off, I marked them with the Sharpie this way to get them centered, but also rotationally as well. I put a hash mark on the top clamp. I don't know if you can see that or not. And I matched that hash mark up with one that I put on the bars. Just got back from a really quick test run. Everything's working fine. I stood up on the pegs and did the bounce test and everything. The bike feels so much more planted. It gets rid of a lot of bikes have a little bit of vibration in the front. I've seen some that are scary and people think it's normal, and that is not normal. It means your adjustments are off. This one has vibration in the front just because of the tires that I'm using. You're going to get buzz and hum and stuff from tires like that, but it is so much more planted on the street anyway, even without any preload or me messing with the compression or rebound adjustments at all yet. So zero preload in this thing handles vastly better than it did with almost full preload in the front and absolutely full preload in the rear. So I'm gonna take my gear off, go inside and get warm and have some whiskey.